Welcome. Good morning. Good afternoon for Jonathan, Marek, and Sebastian. Good morning to Sonia. Why don't we start with a round of presentations from the panelists themselves? Marek, do you want to start?
Yeah. So good morning, good afternoon. Very quickly, it's not going to be a presentation. Screen sharing. PowerPoint.
No, presentation, so introduction.
Yeah, introduction. So just briefly, maybe who I am, and we had a few questions that Enrique asked all of us, and I'm not going to elaborate on them too much. I just don't want to take too much time.
No, I'll get to the questions in a little bit, Marek. Sorry, just an introduction.
Okay, Marek. Okay, great. I'm the first one confusing everything, so that's how you're getting to know me. Marek Tuszynski. I'm co-founder and creative director of Tactical Tech, which is an international organization, non-for-profit, based in Berlin, but works globally. And we work on, I would say, explaining technology and impact of technology on society. We do that through public engagement initiatives, and we do that through direct work with non-for-profit and civil society sector. So on one hand, we create exhibitions, classroom and others that are bringing audience from the street and enable them to talk about things like what is my role in technology, who I am as a user, what's behind the screen in terms of my data, my identity, and who and how is using it. We also explain how the business model, what the accumulation of knowledge and accumulation of information and wealth means in terms of power dynamics and certain shifts. And we also talk about what kind of becomes normalized in society through the use of technology, the way how we decide to use technology. So that's kind of a public-facing work, and we do things also like data detox kit, which is trying to simplify for people a way of dealing with kind of a first barrier that we have with technology. We never, check the settings, and so on. We take things for granted on the face value, and we just show people how you can kind of dive in your own safety of as much as you know about technology, understand what it does to you, how you can change it, what you can learn from it when you see that data about yourself in your own eyes, and so forth. The second part of our work is more focusing on civil society and is looking at the, I would say, fairly negative side of the technology. We've been running quite an extensive project on new influencers that is looking at the about 350 organizations that are trying to play a role in elections, and they are very similar to Cambridge Analytica, that's everybody knows, but we don't really talk about the other 350 very similar businesses out there that are trying to do the same thing, which is gather as much data, analyze this data, profile people, and then help whoever pays them for that help to influence voters in their choices and behaviors. And the last part of our work is looking at, I would say, how you can empower citizens and communities in verifying information, in finding out evidence and data that would help them to defend their own stories, their own narratives, or build the narratives that don't exist that should be there. And that's a project called Exposing the Invisible. And that's more or less, I would say, in the capsule, what Tactical Tech has been doing for the last 17 years. That's how long we've been around. I think that should be enough, Enrique.
That was very interesting. I'll just follow my screen. Jonathan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jonathan Tanner. I have spent the last 2 years hosting a podcast called Government versus the Robots, which looks at how technology will affect politics in the future. And in the week, I am currently to be found at the Overseas Development Institute working on their Digital Societies program.
Sonia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia Jalfin. I'm the director of Socio Público, which is a communication studio for complex ideas, working basically generally in the Americas, based in Buenos Aires. We do all sorts of things to communicate complex ideas, from data visualization, using technology and exploring technology in different ways to try to get to the people with ideas that are abstract, complex, and difficult to grasp, like the ones that think tanks produce. So we work basically with think tanks, international organizations, and in general with people who produces knowledge.
Thank you, Sonia. And Sebastian?
Oh, well, there was Hans too, but he disappeared again. Hi, everyone.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sebastian. I've been busy in the last 5 years building a think tank in Berlin focused on technology and public policy. And we started 5 years ago in Germany because there was a big gap in the think tank ecosystem. So we had really good research organizations focused on foreign policy and economics, even on environmental policy and health policy. But we didn't have a think tank working on policy issues related to technological change, especially connected to digital technologies. And that's what we've been doing since day one. And today we're around 25 experts, and we're covering basically all the relevant policy issues in this space. So we're working on AI issues because a lot of governments are, trying to find out how to boost their ecosystem around that technology. We're also working on cybersecurity policy, on data economics and data policy, and also a lot on digital rights.
Great, thank you. So thank you very much for joining us. And as you can see, our panelists have quite a broad experience in the field, connected from different points of view. And so I had planned to ask three questions to the panel. First, what are the technological challenges that are affecting policy research on think tanks in particular? And of course, there are many, but I asked you to pick a few that you think are the most important ones. What are the effects of these challenges to think tanks, whether they are positive or negatives? For instance, changes to the context in which they operate, or changes to the issues that think tanks have to study, the methods they may be able to use, the tools, the skills, the way they communicate, the way they're governed or managed, etc. So you can, of course, I've asked the panelists to choose what these effects may be, and what may be the implications of these changes and effects to how think tanks are led and supported in the future. So why don't we start by asking Sonia, do you mind going first?
Sure.
Reflecting on what are these technological changes that are affecting policy? What do you think are the most important ones?
Well, as you were saying, Kike, there are so many that it's difficult to choose some. And I'm sure my colleague panelists are going to pick some other ones, but let me mention just three. And I've chosen these three because I think they are being tremendously accelerated by the COVID crisis. And I guess it's difficult to talk today without making a reference to what's going on around us. So the three I've chosen is, the first is data. I'm sure we are going to talk a lot about that today in this panel. And I've chosen data because I think that we have so many things to do on that field. We have so many issues that need to be tackled for us to be able to really take advantage of all that data can offer us for public good. And all the things that we need to do in terms of governance and anonymity and how we handle data from the private and the public sector has a lot to do with how we manage to share data in a safe way, in a safe environment between the public sector and the private sector. And I think think tanks are in a unique position to do that work. They have that work to do because they can be the link between the private and the public sector and the public good in general. And because these two actors have different incentives, think tanks they have a role to play there. So I think that's one thing we can discuss later, that there's a field where technology is having a lot of effects and think tanks have a role to play. The second one, it's something I wanted to introduce because it's not something that comes to mind very frequently when you talk about new technologies, and it's new work methodologies, like the ones that have been used for many years in the software industry, like design thinking and lean methodologies. And I think think tanks, that's something that's also changing with technology, because this is people who work with technology and they have developed these new tools to organize their work. And it's not only that they use technology, but they create these new ways to work with technology. And I think again, think tanks can use those ideas, incorporate those tools, and do a better job by using design thinking, lean methodologies, things like that. And we can also talk about that later a little bit more. And the third thing I would like to mention is my field of work, which is communications. It's quite an obvious one, but communications have been turned upside down completely by technology in the last years. And I think we are going through a revolution of the audience. We all know that we need to put the audience at the center. When we communicate complex ideas, this is particularly relevant. This is something that applies to every marketing or communications team around the world. But when it comes to the communication of complex ideas, it has some particular angles that I would like to discuss later too. But what I think in general is that we are living through this revolution of the audience, but we are still trying to figure out what it means to put the audience at the center, what it means to have the option to do radical customization and segmentation of this audience, and to have conversations with the audience. So that's something that has changed a lot, and I think it will continue to change, and we still need to think about that a little bit to take advantage of these new possibilities.
Sorry, but in respect to the audience, do you mean that so technology is affecting how the audience and how we connect to the audience, or also how the audience connects to think tanks and to knowledge and evidence? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess both. I mean, from the production perspective, we have new tools to communicate with our audience. We can segment our audience. We can have conversations with each of them almost in a very individual one-person to one-person way. Those are possibilities that we have because of technology and we didn't have before. And at the same time, the way consumption is going on, the way that people gets to read or consume the ideas that we put forward has changed completely. The environment they are in when they get to know about our ideas is completely different. What they are doing when they get in touch with what think tanks produce is completely different. And I think we all know that in the communications field, we know that that also because we are starting to understand how design thinking works, we know that we need to put the audience at the center if we want to produce something that is useful for them, and that's mandatory, that we need to produce ideas that are useful to our users, to our audience, but we are still trying to understand how to do that because it changes completely the way think tanks used to produce ideas and the way their audiences used to consume their ideas.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, why don't we stay on the communication side and we go to you.
Sure.
You've been developing some of these ideas also from your experience in this field.
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing to say is I agree with every word that Sonia just said, and I think she's picked on some really salient issues, and there'll probably be a little bit of overlap in what I say here. What I wanted to do was maybe trial a framework that I'm starting to think about the types of challenge that technology pose, and thinking through what those different types of challenge that technology is posing mean for institutions like think tanks, but also mean for the policy space that's opening up around them. And my experience in what I share here is kind of informed by being lucky enough through my podcast to have sat and listened to sort of 50 or so experts, politicians and others reflecting on how what I would term the information ecosystem is changing, and remembering that policymakers who we're trying to influence are, of course, a part of that information ecosystem. So these changes to how we consume information aren't happening in isolation. So I'm not going to get specific around, I'm not going to get granular around specific technology. And I did also want to kind of recognize before diving into it that there's a lot of buzz around technology at the moment. And I think it's for those of us that work on tech, being mindful of that buzz is something that we should keep front of mind. And a lot of people watching will be familiar with Gartner's hype cycle for emerging technologies, which features both a kind of peak of inflated expectations and a plateau of productivity. And I think in a lot of respects, we're still climbing the peak of inflated expectations around tech. And from my perspective, the two technologies which matter most as the first order technology of the internet and the transformative potential that it's brought, and the second order transformative potential of AI being composed of big data and machine learning. Because often when we talk about tech, it can be a very huge topic and there's loads of technologies to get to grips with. And actually, when you strip it down, from my perspective, whilst drones and driverless cars and so on are all exciting and important and justify their own policy debates, the real transformative drivers remain the internet and artificial intelligence as the emerging transformative driver. And obviously can't go without speaking about coronavirus. So just to say that kudos to Kike for this experimentation and the format that we're using. I find meetings pretty dreadful when they're in person. So when it requires just sitting and staring at a screen for an hour, I can slowly lose the will to live. And that's why I think it's really important that we collectively consider how to spend our time online, either socially or very much focused on collaboration, and thinking about how we can actively collaborate with that time online, and maybe challenge ourselves to rethink the structure of the meeting and the purpose of the meeting. And maybe if ever we're going to manage to do that, now might be the time. But let me come back to the three types of challenge that technology brings to us, and how they relate to think tanks. And this is something that I'm currently working through in an essay for ODI's Digital Societies team. So very grateful for challenge and feedback. And the three types of challenge are implementation challenges, adaptation challenges, and political challenges. And to try and say a little bit more about each of those, both in terms of policy for think tanks and also in terms of practice for think tankers. So implementation challenges are the challenges we have in putting technology to use in a very practical sense. So from a policy point of view, that's, how do we get people online? Do we need digital identity systems? What should they look like? How do we make sure that civil society organizations are equipped to use the internet safely in a cloud-based future? But in practice for think tanks, it's the same question about, well, how do we actually use technology? Do we have the right software for all of our staff? Do we have reliable high-speed internet access? Are we using apps to process expenses, or is it still taking 3 members of the finance team 3 weeks to get the expenses processed? Is our cybersecurity up to scratch? Do we have to insist everybody uses Skype for Business, or can everybody find their own solutions, which seems to be the case in this kind of chaotic COVID moment? But those are the implementation challenges, just putting technology to use. How do we do it? How do we use technology well? And then we have what I would talk about adaptation challenges. And those are challenges which are about how we do things differently once that technology is in place, and the different incentives that those technologies can create for people to behave differently. So in ODI, we work in 6 different areas on digital. So there's digital economies, there's public services, there's geopolitics, there's citizenship, there's discourse, and each of those brings questions around, from a policy point of view, what do future forms of welfare look like? What do we do with cybersecurity and international cooperation? How do we deal with the challenges of disinformation? All of these are ways in which different disciplines are having to adapt to the changes that technology is bringing. So to kind of reflect what Sonia was just saying, in terms of discourse, the technology has undoubtedly totally transformed the information ecosystem. And one of the biggest transformations that we've seen is the fragmentation of media, and at the same time, plummeting levels of trust in institutions. So how do institutions adapt to secure trust and retain legitimacy? And how do you communicate with policymakers as part of this information ecosystem? Are big policy questions. And in practice, for think tanks, this means that there's going to need to be an evolution in the subject matter expertise that staff have to deal with some of these questions. You're going to have to think really carefully about what skills we want from people in the think tank workforce. Data fluency seems like a must. Storytelling's always been really important, but the ability to tell stories in creative and visual ways is even more important when you consider that we're very quickly moving beyond text as the primary form of communication in a lot of mainstream culture, and think tanks haven't quite caught up with that. Do we want people who are able to do forecasting or modeling using code or artificial intelligence? Do we need people who are skilled in human-centered design to make sure that we get service delivery right when we're designing potential large-scale programs? And that raises a concurrent question about the types of partnerships that think tanks want to strike and who they want to strike them with. So, I mean, we receive inquiries from people with huge amounts of mobile or satellite data who are trying to put those to good use. We don't need to collect that data ourselves, and often we wouldn't choose to use it. But you can think creatively about who you need when, and that, for me, I think for think tanks, challenges the idea that you need a permanent workforce working on the same thing 100% of the time. It may very well be that a much more flexible workforce with tailored expertise that can be drawn down for specific projects is much more helpful in being agile in how you give policy prescriptions to particular questions that clients might be forming. And just quickly on the comms, as I've worked in communications for several years, my own take is that we're going to see a period of hyper fragmentation where everybody is consuming media in their own unique way, and that's going to require much stronger analysis of the social networks that people are part of and who are the biggest influencers within those social networks. You need to think much more carefully about where your content fits within an emerging attention economy. We all give so much attention to the smartphone and the screen. How do you make sure that you're able to command attention within that? And again, that speaks to post-text content. And how do we manage communities around our brands that support our ability to deliver direct messaging to the audience? And whether that's the management of WhatsApp groups or newsletters, thinking really carefully about how you curate your audience and make sure they have an ongoing relationship with the organization is one way of building trust, and something I think is going to be really important. And then the last type of challenge is political challenges. So obviously there's huge new policy space, even more so post-coronavirus, around inequality and models of capitalism, types of democracy, regulation of AI, ethics of AI, privacy, even bringing together tech and climate debates to kind of try and paint a more inspiring vision of the future than is often available at the moment. But in practice for think tanks, and this is maybe where I get most controversial in what I'll say here, I think that makes that scale of political challenge around new technology, and particularly the moment that's been created with the coronavirus, means it's critical to stay very true to the guiding mission of the think tank and the organization and think through how you can achieve that mission. Because if there's a lot of excitement for people who feel like the thing they always felt was important is now proven to be important because of coronavirus, you see a lot of people talking about a big moment of international cooperation, for example. If Donald Trump's re-elected, I don't rate the chances of the G7 or the G20 being able to deliver a kind of big post-coronavirus vision for a better future. And that, for me, suggests that think tank leadership is going to need to be bold and brave about how they consider their mission and how they live their mission in a currently much more politicized information environment. And actually on each of us, there's then a requirement to think through what we're doing individually as a part of that as well. So maybe I'll leave it there just to wrap up. You've got implementation challenges around putting tech in place, adaptation challenges around doing things differently once that tech's in place, and political challenges about the kind of wider societal impacts of those changes.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I think they kind of match quite nicely also with what Sonia was saying in terms of new technologies related to data, to the tools that are out there, the implementation of some of these new ways of working, such as design thinking or agile design, and also the wider changes to the context in which, specifically to the audiences and how audiences engage with information and with policy and with think tanks themselves. Why don't we go to Sebastian, who's running a think tank looking at technology. What are your reflections about these challenges and the effects they're having on think tanks?
Well, I had some time to think about this, so but I try to keep it short. Looking back at the 5 years we've been working on this, I think there's two big challenges we experienced. The first is about knowledge and the problem that all the technologies that play a crucial part in public policy making nowadays and driving change that the knowledge about these technologies is not really, you can't really find it in books or like the classical research resources we usually use. So it's really about finding new ways to get data, to get knowledge. And that was a big struggle for us and still is. And the second one is about speed. So there are a lot of technologies governments are struggling with. If you take the Internet of Things as a very popular example, or AI as the big buzzword, but these, if you look in detail at the technologies, they are incredibly changing spaces of technology. I mean, there's a lot of happening, and you really have to work fast if you want to produce usable policy recommendations on these technologies. So these are the big two things we're struggling with as an organization. About the first point, expertise. So we have this big problem that in a lot of cases, so if you take AI, for example, if you want to advise governments on how to build a really good AI strategy, maybe boosting the economy in the sector or making sure the research system is really focusing on the right things. You have to be, I mean, you can't Google and look for research papers in this area because most of the stuff wasn't been written yet. So what you need to do is you have to sort of change your research approach and maybe shift more towards a network approach. So what we are doing is we have a big network of companies we're working with together, which is really hard to keep track of. It's really hard to get in touch with these people because they're in such a big demand. I mean, if you want to talk to AI companies nowadays, it's incredibly hard to get their time and make them help you understand what's going on. A lot of knowledge also shifted towards civil society. So on some issues like especially in the surveillance and privacy area, there's a lot of experience with nonprofits and single activists even. So they are becoming more and more important also as a source for knowledge. I mean, Technical Tech is a great example. They have some incredible experts who are also leading in scientific debates. And so the way we gather our information is changing, and it's becoming problematic, but also interesting. And about the speed, to give you one example, when we make plans for a new project, for a new research project, usually on average, our think tank projects on a specific issue, like, I don't know, 5G and Huawei, these projects nowadays, they only last 1.5 years. And then already after 1 year, we're starting to totally change the focus because it's so fast, such a fast changing environment. So those are for me at least, the big two challenges in everyday think tank work.
And I think there's a huge implementation challenge for many think tanks who probably already feel that the research process is too slow to keep up with the processes without considering tech. And now if technology is going to be the focus of your research and it's going to speed things up, then that's going to put a lot of pressure into researchers being much faster in thinking about their projects and bringing them, delivering them, and then putting forward policy recommendations that are still relevant to the context in which they are working. So thank you, Sebastian. And then finally, for the first round of introductions and presentations, Marek. I was going to say that I met Marek a very long time ago when I was at ODI. In the early 2000s, I think, and you guys at Tactical were doing some very interesting work back then on technology, and so it's been quite a pleasure to reconnect with their work and see how their website has a lot more content than it had back then. But Marek, tell us a little bit about what you think are those challenges that that are affecting organizations like think tanks. I know you guys work with many other types of organizations in civil society, but if you could try to relate to the effect that it has on think tanks, then that would be great.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for Sebastian and you for all the shout outs to Tactical Tech. I totally appreciate it. I'll pass it on to the team. They'll be happy to hear that the organization work is actually recognized and valued, which is great to know because we don't get often that kind of direct feedback. So yes, we work mostly with small, medium-sized organizations and a lot of networks that are informal. So I think it will be also important to talk about large organizations, universities, for example, etc. In the current crisis, they have much larger challenges and problems that they have to carry on with something that is crucial and important, and they have no way to figure it out by themselves. I think what we, in terms of civil society, small, medium organizations, we've been doing that fight for a while. So there's a kind of I would say, more preparedness for this kind of situation. I would follow some of the thoughts that especially Sonia and Jonathan and Sebastian already said. I'm the last speaker, so obviously I would not repeat everything that you have said. I'm just going to add a little bit of things here and there, and maybe in three categories, since you were all kind of organizing that into like a consistent number of issues. So for me, I think all of them will relate into the current pandemic situation, because this kind of situation accelerates and amplifies issues that we usually neglect or kind of don't have time to think about. Now we have a lot of time to actually reconsider how we think about something as crucial as technology in our work and life. And now we cannot actually do anything without it if we want to carry on with work as we've been doing, or even life as we want to have it in terms of communication, contact, and also seeking for information and being updated and so forth, etc. It is crucial. And I think from the small and medium organization, and specifically think tanks that are in a way, or at least want to be influencers, not in a YouTube kind of a way, but actually would like to influence policy, for example, and so forth, the choices of what kind of is significant. And obviously in the crisis situation, what counts the most is efficiency, and what counts the most is safety. But we should not forget that every single technology we're using, and that either is an application or software or a framework like whatever, machine learning, ideology, etc., comes with its business models, comes with its technoculture, comes with ideology behind it, and comes with certain possibilities of creating or not creating a social, political, economical environment in the future that have to go to these technological filters. And we will make choices that would support authoritarian technology that is either proprietary, centralized, with all the data you producing, but you have no access to it, etc. We may accelerate processes of basically Amazonization of how we do things in research, how we do things in relation of organizing, mobilizing, and so forth, etc. Code or math or algorithm are not neutral, and software is not neutral at all. It doesn't mean that this software is bad or is good. It's all contextual, and it's all about who or how is using it. But we start using multi-billion platforms that either coming from Silicon Valley or whatever Californian way of thinking about tech and society, or others that are produced in China or in places like Russia and so forth. We are in a way making decisions about what kind of digitized society we're gonna very soon be living. And it's not only about how you produce your research and publish it, is about how you communicate. Even this platform that we're using right now, what does it mean to all the data? What does it mean to the recording? Who can analyze it? Who can use it? What are the limitations for the participants to participate in terms of privacy, security, safety, but also, being associated with certain groups of people with certain ideas. Association is very important, and you may expose people positions inadvertently, incidentally, that for them may be actually crucial. I'm not gonna kind of go on and on and on because it's kind of boring in the long run. But I think we are non-neutral in the very non-neutral space. These decisions are right now crucial. Second issue, and I agree with Sonia a lot, is about data. So we see two things. One is that crisis situation, and we've seen that prior to the pandemic. If you look at migration, if you look at the global warming or climate change and so forth, a lot of entities and agencies are kind of cannot really do anything to prove three things. They want to be efficient, so they want to show that they spend money well. They want to prove that they are transparent, so anybody can see how they spend the money, and they want to prove that they are accountable, so anybody can see how the money is being spent by those who are being given the money, like in aid, etc. And we've seen a lot of things where the best solutions that are being used are practically monitoring and surveillance solutions, where the agency that is delivering aid or delivering anything, in terms of help, etc., is completely demolishing autonomy and aid of those who are being helped. They become, data subjects. They have no way of opting out from this kind of situation, etc. And we see right now during the pandemic or any other crisis that these tendencies are being instantly implemented because they're quick, they deliver information, and they are, short term. And in the short term, they do the job. But when you think long term about the consequences of using these technologies and this kind of modes of thinking, I think it's quite dangerous. And what I would like to also kind of refer this point about the data to the previous point about the choices of technology is about the fact that if we use centralized methods of operating, we are empowering intermediaries. And the intermediaries may be, the Googles and Facebooks of the world, or Baidu's or whatever, and there can be also telcos. And neither you as an individual or organization or government will ever have access to that vast amount of information and data that they're collecting from all these activities, directly, indirectly, through metadata and so forth, etc. You may ask for a little bit of it. Some people may offer you something and so forth. But then the question is not only that you have these monopolies on knowledge that are out there that we, by choosing certain technologies, are supporting, because that's how they work. You get the services cheaply or for free for the exchange of your and people who are contributing to your work data. Is the fact that these intermediaries are also the only ones that can, through monetizing that information, build infrastructure that enables them to analyze that information and draw knowledge from it and so forth. And even if you've been given that vast amount of data, we would probably lack skills, and you would probably lack infrastructure to be able to process that at any scale. And I find it also quite complicated where large corporations are in such a powerful position where this entire world is fairly unregulated yet. And, data once given is data lost forever, to say that kind of funny way of saying it. And the last thing I want to say, and that's the only thing I probably want to add to the discussion, is kind of expanding to what you all said so nicely, is that the other kind of what this way of proliferation of communication is doing right now is the fact that institutions like organizations like think tanks that are producing knowledge have to fight unfair and imbalanced fight with misinformation and populism, if you like. And it is unfair and so forth because research and science requires time, and gathering, processing, you can't do it overnight. It's just even if you had the best AI and it was nice AI, not mean to you and so forth, you wouldn't be able to do that. And that's for me really a significant challenge. It's not only because all this, like Jonathan said, all these channels and the fragmentation are so, you can't comprehend them really, how people consume information, produce information, how misinformation is floating and so forth in these opaque channels, also supported by things that we actually believe are very important, like encryption and so forth. It's confusing what is good, what is bad. In this hyper-connected world, also the fact that the science and knowledge is disregarded is very dangerous for think tanks, that what you're bringing is exactly that. And people make decisions not based on rational choices. And even if you pack your information amazingly nicely and it becomes viral, you have very little chances to fight with those who speak directly, speak, so-called true, and so forth, and basically can break all the rules, while we are obliged to stick to the rules and basically be ethical, and how you fight that kind of information warfare with those who can afford not being ethical and so forth. So those are the kind of 3 things. There's a very different take, maybe a bit, I'm maybe a bit excited about it, but apologies for that. Oh, I cannot hear Enrique.
Me neither.
I muted myself, sorry. Okay. Thank you very much for that first round. And
this time it wasn't
technology. It wasn't technology, I know. Some people are having, I recognize some people are having trouble with the audio, sometimes with the video. I know it's not for everybody, so we'll just keep going, and then we'll learn as we go, as we said before. I took a few things here, and I'm going to use Jonathan's implementation, adaptation, and politics sort of classification for my own sake, at least. And I'm thinking about adaptation in terms of how can think tanks take all of this information in. What you've said. So everything from it's hard to get access to information, to data, to knowledge about these technologies, as Sebastian was saying. It's hard to connect one-to-one with your different audiences. Audiences, they're changing, they are evolving, as Sonia was referring to. There's a speed in these issues that we need to address. It's a sense of urgency that we've always had, but it's probably higher now. There's huge competition with other actors to get our message out there. And as Marek just said, some of those actors are misinformation. They are sort of not playing fairly in a way against think tanks. And they have many more resources. Jonathan, Sonia, you referred to skills, right? So the think tanks, by and large, not necessarily have the competencies and skills or the knowledge about some of these technologies and how to use them, how to engage in these issues like AI and machine learning. So these are concepts we have to look up most of the time. And I expect a lot of think tankers nowadays working in these fields are blagging their way through conversations while they learn in events and in discussions and in interviews, because that's not what they've been trained for. And we don't necessarily have all the resources and time. And Marek, you added an interesting point, is that the choices we made about what issues to address, what tools to use, and how the organization adapts to using these tools might actually go against our own missions. We might be promoting or strengthening systems or processes that we would like to fight against, or the evidence or research in the past has told us we have to address. So this poses a lot of challenges to think tanks as they adapt to the new context. Can you reflect on that? Can you reflect on what can think tanks do to take on some of these challenges that you have highlighted, and move forward, right? If we were trying to be more practical, what would be the advice that you can provide think tanks from your own different points of view in going forward? Sonia, can I? Yeah.
If I can, take one thing that you mentioned and that was interesting to me that Sebastian mentioned before. It's the issue of how we use time when in this deeply digitalized world, because it has changed a lot. And one thing is that we need to, as you were saying, Enrique, we need to produce results faster than before, and at the same time collaborating with more people and with the same rigor, because we are at the same time fighting misinformation. And we have been experimenting with the International Development Bank, doing some workshops and pilots using design thinking methodologies and lean methodologies to try to adapt the way they work doing research using these new methodologies, working methodologies, that basically they are all about having shorter sprints of collaboration with intermediate results. Sebastian was talking about how a 1.5-year time for a project seems too long now, and we know many think tanks work with 3 years prospects or in international organization, that's quite common, but we need to do that faster now. So if we have shorter sprints of collaboration, and then we have intermediate results that we can show, we have more iteration, and at the same time, we keep track of what our audience need all the time. We put our audience at the center, and these are the basic principles of these methodologies. Then I think we can try to adapt to these new fast processes we need to achieve. And also, talking about time, I think it has changed a lot the way we consume ideas, and we produce ideas faster, but we also consume ideas faster, or at least in an environment where our attention is being very demanded. And we might feel sometimes as users that we don't have enough time to look at all the ideas we would like to learn about, or to learn about these new technologies or any other things that we're interested in. And I think that changes a lot the way we as organizations try to communicate our ideas, because we might get caught in this sense that we need to do all the time very, very short communication pieces and to summarize everything that we do. And as Marek was saying, producing knowledge takes time, and understanding complex ideas takes time. And it's just not true that you can summarize everything. And I think summarizing is sometimes lethal. You cannot say, you cannot convey a complex idea in 10 seconds without losing something important in the middle. So what we've been, and we used to think of communications as a funnel a short time ago, where you put something like very short on social media and then pray for people to go to your long report and read it, some of them at least. And I think that is changing now, because we have the opportunity to segment our audience and try to get to the right audience, and build communities, as Jonathan was suggesting. But at the same time, we have new tools that are provided by technology. And we have been, at Sociopublico, we have been experimenting with some of them. And these are new tools that allow us to have longer times with our audiences. Like, for instance, podcasts, as Jonathan is running one. I love the title, by the way, Government versus Robots. I will listen to it. But podcasts is a great example. And we've been experimenting with chatbots, doing chatbots for think tanks on very different topics, such as the future of politics. For instance, we did one. We did another one on how to be a minister of economy, and we did another one on misinformation, trying a bot that helps you spot misinformation. And we have seen through these experiences that people tend to stay longer when they are in a conversation, even if it is with a bot. So we are trying to learn how these new tools help us stay connected with the audience for a longer time, because although it is true that we are all very overwhelmed by information, and we tend to skip or scroll in our timelines very quickly without stopping to read anything or to listen to anything, it is also true that we do binge watching with Netflix series, and we can stay for 6-7 hours connected with a piece of narrative that is interesting to us. So I think the combination of these new tools and always something very analog, not technological, that is creativity and great copy, that combination can help us stay with our audience for longer times. And time is here very, very important, because we have complex ideas to communicate and they need time. So I think time is an interesting key to read all these different processes.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Sonia. I'm very curious about the chatbot experience you guys have had. So I don't know if you can then afterwards share it.
By the way, I'm going to dig deeper into that in the last panel of the conference. So it's funny that I don't know why Keith put me at the very beginning and at the very end, but this is the panel with. That's going to be facilitated by Sean Schwartz from Soapbox, and I'm going to be showing some of these chatbots and talking about that a bit.
Great, thank you. And with podcasts, then we can segue into Jonathan. a great way of conveying complex ideas in a way that is still engaging and using technology. Jonathan, I saw you wanted to answer my question before, and I went to Sonia.
First off,
do you have any reflections on
from your characterization of people as blagging their way through whilst learning as much as they can from conversations, which is a fairly accurate description of my career to date. So if anybody else recognizes
okay.
Please don't worry. It's not just you. And actually, the perfect way of doing that for me was the podcast, because that was a way of me being able to sit down with people who.
Have we lost Jonathan?
Mm-hmm.
Been a really good learning experience as a presenter, even before you get onto the ability to use podcasts as a medium for sharing ideas. I'm not going to evangelize too much about podcasts. I mean, I think if people aren't aware, the audiences for them have exploded. Far more people are listening to them than ever before. And it fits into this idea that people are increasingly consuming media in a way that is personal to them and only them. And there's as ever with these things, there's a real spectrum of quality when it comes to podcasts. From people will record whole events and put them out as a podcast without even thinking about the fact that that is a completely different medium, to people who are putting really quite a lot of money into serious production values and making something that is as good as any radio program was in the last 20 years. So a whole different conversation around podcasts. I think two things I'd say on your kind of reflection about getting ideas out there. One of my favorite writers on disinformation and the information ecosystem is a guy called Pete Pomerantsev, who's based at LSE. And he wrote a book called, I can't remember the title. This Is Not Propaganda, the book's called. And in it, he makes the point that the marketplace of ideas is essentially dead. We've had this assumption for the last few decades that if you've got a good idea and you get it out there and you get enough people to listen, it will rise to the top and your idea will gain traction and people will start to engage with it. Well, in a fragmented information ecosystem, there is no guarantee that good ideas make it to the top. Good ideas might only reach your 50 Twitter followers, or they might find themselves too easily dismissed. So this idea of a kind of free market of ideas, we've moved beyond that. And that leads me to come back again to the point around how important the communications are around this and how important community management is, and sustaining an ongoing conversation with the people who are willing to engage and give you that time. And then another point I think is just a challenge to, if you're a think tank wondering about technology and where does it apply, you need to break that problem down, because the amount of problems that technology is throwing up is enormous. And if you don't break it down, you won't start to get to grips. And it might be that implementation, adaptation, and politics is one way of breaking it down, but thinking through what's your bit of this, is it that there's a particular function within your think tank where a new bit of technology would create a big difference or make a big cost saving, and you just need to knuckle down on that for a couple of months? Is it that there's this huge new policy area that you can move into and win work on? How do you break down the technology problem? I think there'll be very different answers for different think tanks, and some of it will be about little internal projects, and some of it will be about huge, big new pieces of work.
Jonathan, Sebastian, do you wanna jump in on that issue of how to address all of these things and how can think tanks respond to these challenges?
I mean, we've been discussing the really big challenges in the past 20 minutes. Maybe also to add to the discussion some really practical things we're doing right now that might be interesting for other people. So one thing we're really interested in right now is AI translation. So usually we're having this problem that we're mostly focused on national policymakers, that we had to write in German. And this became more and more a problem because a lot of technology issues, they're also really important to other policymakers in other European countries. But we didn't have the budget to do like a bilingual writing process. And what we are now doing is we're basically machine translating most of our papers. And this has dramatically reduced the time and money we're spending on this. it's really a dream. If you haven't tried it out, you would be surprised how well these translation machines are today. And it's basically, it's not a problem to publish in multiple languages anymore if that's necessary. Another thing is research is becoming, or at least quantitative research is becoming cheaper, and there's also a lot of new stuff you can do. So in most of the cases, if you're a classical public policy think tank, you rarely would engage in real producing data yourself. In most of the cases, you would use scientific research partners who would provide the data. But nowadays, you can really do stuff yourselves. Technical tech is also, they're also producing data. This is becoming cheaper and faster, and think tanks should try this out. We've been really successful in doing a data analysis project on disinformation back in 2017, just to understand the problem. And if there's a new problem you don't understand, the best thing is to gather data yourself. And we basically borrowed a lot of methodologies from the advertisement industry who have really nice data analytics tools. Think tanks can use them too, to understand debates, to understand what's going on in the public discourse, but this might be also true for other policy domains. Maybe not a new thing from economics, but at least for political scientists, this is something interesting. Another thing is, of course, writing. At the Stiftung where I work, we're all writing in online documents, collaborating while we write, and this also makes it a lot easier to get other people outside of your organization into the writing process. You save a lot of time. You can also connect this to your publishing process, which also saves you a lot of time, a lot of money. Also interesting thing you can do. And the whole community approach, of course. So usually, the old model was that you have the think tank, and the think tank publishes results, and and there's this press officer, and journalists approach the press officer, and maybe some policymakers get in touch with the experts directly, but for us, this is the old approach. So what we're doing now is basically that the experts are becoming influencers, or not, that's the wrong word, but more community leads for their topic on issue areas. And they communicate with people directly. They also work collaboratively with them. And that wasn't possible 6 years ago, especially not in Germany, because people are so critical and also slowly adapting, especially social media. And the last thing, security. That's a big problem. So we really have to step up our investments into IT security. If you're, depending on the issue area you're working in, so if you're working on security policy, you're really becoming a target for attackers, and you really need to step up your IT security in the organization, which is a problem because it's so expensive, and we haven't figured out how to deal with this yet. Because finding IT security experts who really make sure your networks are secure, that people, only use software and systems that can be trusted and that have, checks in that, it's a big problem. That's all from me.
Thank you. All of these seem very practical and useful. And I guess in the long run, in some cases, they will be saving us a bit of money as well, and saving us resources in time once we know how to use these technologies efficiently. Before we go into Marek, there was a question, I don't want to forget about this, but there was a question about the translation machines or machine translation. Are you recommending Google Translate, or are you suggesting there are better services out there that you guys can use?
I haven't worked with Google Translate. We're using DeepL. Okay,
so there's a range of services that organizations can purchase and use to help them with translation.
You don't need to purchase anything. They're actually free. But the pro versions, they cost a bit, but it's really only a couple of bucks.
Okay. And I guess sort of segue into Marek, of course, nothing is free, so there must be a reason why they're giving you the service to use. They might be reading through your documents. But Marek, what practical things do you think think tanks can do to address some of these challenges emerging from our conversation?
I don't have much to add to Sonia, Jonathan, and Sebastian. There are a few things I would emphasize maybe, and maybe going on the last topic from Sebastian, which is the infrastructure that you only spoke about, the IT security, but I would just talk about the IT in general and use of tools and so forth, and kind of counter Enrique here, because I think a lot of these things that we're starting to use will make things cheaper, but other things will become more expensive. So, and I don't think you're gonna overall go cheaper. You just have to distribute resources differently, and things I think actually will go more expensive. And I think so. The first thing for me for think tanks, when you think about the environment in which you're operating, the most important thing would be, and across the different sectors, is the education and collaboration with those who give you money, foundations, public bodies, etc., and so forth. So they have better understanding what kind of infrastructure is necessary, what kind of infrastructure, what are the politics of given infrastructure, and so forth. There's a massive expectation I've seen from people who, give money for think tanks and research is also, all qualitative. So how many followers you have, how many, likes you have, how many visitors to websites you have, and so forth, etc., which is kind of not necessarily the most important thing you should be looking into. And then we all have to go for the mainstream platforms because they give you the biggest numbers. But that becomes more and more meaningless. You're just feeding the same machine from which you actually don't benefit, and so forth. I think the education here should be very important, that we all making technological political choices, and they are, they cost money. They cost money in terms of paying for the infrastructure, but also learning new skills. And that has to be embedded in, grants, proposals, and other things where it has to be something that you can sustain as an institutional organization. It cannot be sorted for this project, for this amount of money, with these expectations, and so forth, etc. No, I mean, if we're building civil society based on research, etc., we need infrastructure for that actually is sustainable in many different ways of sustainable. And I think there's a lot to do with convincing those who give money for these kind of things how important it is. And that's one of the things I would say. The other thing is that almost everything we're looking at right now is becoming quantitative. It's the obsession about talking about numbers. And I think think tanks should focus on qualitative research and so forth. And from our perspective, what is interesting, what speaks to audiences, and we've done this experimentation last 4 years running big exhibitions, where we brought topics that are extremely, boring. Talking about technology and privacy, etc. Nobody would actually want to talk about it for various reasons. Either it's very technical, full of acronyms and concepts that are non-related to your actual experience in life and needs and so forth. But also, if you have other choices, you would rather choose other things to talk about rather than talk about that, since technology works anyway, so who cares, kind of thing. And the other thing is with that what people are expecting is something tangible that addresses their place in the world when you talk about technology. So if you can make things or your research, etc., relate to people actual experiences, this is where you actually can influence something that is very important. And those are two things that we try to influence, which is behavior and way of thinking about things. And that doesn't happen overnight. You can't just run a half-an-hour session on something and you're going to change somebody's behavior. I never seen that. Probably even in animals, and so forth. This just doesn't work like this. So the expectation that we're gonna use some, communication tricks or fantastic training, etc., with short-term, intervention here and there, it's not gonna change anything. It's actually people go back to where they were, or if you do it in the wrong way, if you scare people, if you overload them with information, etc., that actually makes people feel disempowered, and they would not pursue. You're actually removing them from possibility of changing their behavior, and it's going to take the next, generation of people who would try to do that much more effort, if you like. So, and what we've learned also from the public interventions, and we had, thousands of people in San Francisco. We had 21,000 people visiting the exhibition in 3 weeks, and we had like thousands of feedback cards, etc. People are interested in very specific questions. Everybody is interested in actually how things work, what they do, etc. but there is no public space. There's no places in which you can freely ask these questions without feeling, intimidated or feeling just basically stupid and so forth. And maybe that's why other things speak to people more than how we communicate. I don't know. That may be a bit too bold assumption. I don't want to make at this point. But those are the things I would perhaps add to what everybody said so far.
Thank you, Marek. So we have some questions from the audience, and interestingly, a lot of the questions are about sort of practical advice or practical references to practical experiences that you might have. But I want to give you also the chance before we go to think about questions for each other. If you want to sort of jump in and you have something to ask or say to your colleagues in the panel. Let me start with one for all of you that came up from. That was directed at Sonia, but I think you might have. Sonia, I think you've answered some of this already. So, how to better engage with audiences digitally? I mean, you talked about bots, I guess, chat bots. I guess podcasts are one way of doing that. What other ways do you others have that you see right now are working well, are working effectively to engage with audiences digitally, taking into account what you said about the need to go one-on-one, what Marek just mentioned about the different audiences want different things, they want different experiences. What can you add to that?
I would say that if you want to say it in one word, it's to think of the users. Like, users is the key. And then you can use technology to try to get individually to each user or to a community and build these communities. But in the end, it's all about, that's why I've been talking about design thinking methodologies and how we are starting to use them and do workshops with think tanks and knowledge producers to help them use these tools. Because if you have clarity about how you need to put the audience at the center, then all your communication needs to change to think how you can become useful to your audience, how you can do. I don't know if you've heard of another workbook methodology that is called jobs to be done. So you can always ask your ideas, the knowledge you want to share, what job is your knowledge going to do for your audience? How is it going to help them? There are a couple of examples. I mean, these days are great to look for new successful examples of communications. That's why I think many of the things we are talking about that have been accelerated by the coronavirus and these very old days we are living through. And I can mention a couple of examples. One is not related to think tanks at all, but I loved it. It's something that happened where I am now in Argentina. And it's this a very famous cook. She's someone who cooks on TV and has a restaurant, and she's very famous. And she has decided, just using Twitter, she has offered people to let her know what do they have in the fridge, and she will reply saying what they can cook with that to avoid going out for food to the supermarket. So she's all the time just tweeting, like, people send pictures of their fridge, or just they say, I have some cucumbers and rice, and she will come up with a recipe. So, and she's not using technology in a very sophisticated way. She's just doing this on Twitter. But what I think it's interesting about this example is that she is thinking how the things she knows can help someone do something very specific, that it's useful during this crisis. And going to a more think tanker example, most of you probably saw these days an article by the Washington Post explaining what does it mean to flatten the curve. And I think that the whole idea of flatten the curve is so interesting because we are looking at this statistical concept that has entered everyday language. All of us are talking about this and about exponentiality. That's something, exponentiality in particular, it's something. So it's a concept so difficult to grasp for our brains, and now suddenly we are all talking about it. So this article by the Washington Post that has animations to show the different patterns that the curve can have, and to explain what it is to flatten the curve, it was so successful, and it's a long article, a very technical article, but it's been so successful that the editors have decided to translate it, to go into Sebastian's point. They translated it into 8 different languages. So now you can read it in your language. And I think this is another example of how when what you are talking about is relevant to your audience, because this is like the key here is that they are talking about something. We wouldn't care about the concept of flattening a car before, but now it is something that affects directly our safety and our health. So that's why we are paying attention. So if you talk about something that's relevant to your audience, and of course, if you do it using great copy and creativity and using the right digital tools, like in this case, the animations, then you have the chance to still get to a lot of people and to have time with them. That's something that's scarce, it's difficult to get, but if you start by thinking about them, then you have a much better chance of them paying attention to you. So these are two very different examples of these days.
Great, thank you. It just reminds me of the every year I used to enjoy the BBC has a calculator that tells you how better off or worse off you are after the budget. And I think data and a very simple interface allows individuals to engage with what is a complex policy announcement. And then that obviously opens up your curiosity to engage even further with research or with information about a particular story. So there are ways of doing this in the past. Anybody else from the panel would like to address that? Any examples you have, practical examples about how to engage more effectively digitally?
Yeah, so I would just quickly say 2 things. One is really good newsletters are still really strong right now. And the other one, I think WhatsApp groups and other closed communication groups will go from strength to strength. And people who have been doing email newsletters, I can see that quickly moving to WhatsApp discussion groups, and maybe even sort of you curate that WhatsApp group in the same way you might have curated your newsletter. I think that's going to be happening more and more. Incidentally, we have our version of the Argentinian cook in that there is a personal trainer in the UK who is doing a 9 a.m. YouTube personal training lesson for the nation's school children, who's become the British PE teacher. And what he's doing is that direct, disintermediated communication. That I think the ability of think tanks to do that is going to get more and more important. When I was working with More United, which is a political movement in the UK, we hosted a live, we streamed over Twitter and Instagram, a live discussion every Monday evening with 3 MPs from different political parties. And the challenge was to get them to agree. So rather than every other TV program where it's built around the disagreement, the challenge was to get the MPs to agree. And we had really good viewing numbers and engagement around that. And also actually, because it was just that little bit different, it made the MPs behave differently as well in ways that started to lead to them working together more often on the side. So that was quite an interesting example.
Sure, I've got other questions, unless you want to add into those Marek and Sebastian.
I can quickly add. One thing, kind of, not countering Jonathan. Obviously, when you say WhatsApp, I'm immediately raising all the flags I have to raise. Which is obvious and is kind of predictable and not that interesting, is that I think, and I contradict myself here, is the most important thing I think to do is to meet people where they are. People are curious, people are intelligent, people are looking for things and trying things and so forth. And it may be unfortunate that the biggest public space is WhatsApp right now, but also it's an extremely dangerous space. It is the space that is proliferating misinformation at scale that we have not seen before ever. So when you're there, you can do a good thing, but at the same time, you are supporting a platform that is extremely controversial, in my opinion, and problematic. And I would actually advise to do that, but with the mindset knowing what you're doing, how you're doing it, and so forth. I would never say don't do this, don't use Facebook, etc. We use any possible platform that is out there, but we are also conscious that we would not do certain things on these platforms because those are black boxes operated by actors that do not share any values with us, and they don't share information with us either. You only get this, fragment that you believe is the right one, but you don't even know how it is manipulated, if what you're seeing is what you should be seeing, or what somebody else wants you to see, and so forth, etc. It's very convoluted, complicated space, but I still would insist that we have to meet people where they are and offer them something that is practical, that is experiential. Not everybody would read long text, and that's okay. But long text can be, transferred into many different formats. If you have that, you can do anything you want with it. And I would just encourage people to do that because it's very important to find formats and languages that would resonate with people more than what resonates with us. Who I personally prefer reading complicated scientific text than watching video, but that's just me.
Marek and Sebastian, I think another of the questions come up is about developing your skills to use technology, but also your skills to analyze data, processes, etc. So, is in your experiences, is this something that think tanks are going to have to kind of buy into? So rethink their staff, rethink who is working in the organization. Or is this something that can be trained within the organization? And what might be your advice in how to do this? How can think tanks get much better at dealing with that data, with the data out there, accessing, analyzing it, using it, and how can they develop the skills that they need to use tech in a way that is advantageous to the organization?
Do you mind, Sebastian, if I jump in? Okay, so very quickly for me, like what we try to do within the Exposing the Invisible, which is focusing on, citizen investigation, is that's kind of impossible if you think about learning skills and building infrastructure in-house with little resources that would last. You may learn one thing, but it's going to be, unusable in a couple of years if you're lucky, and so forth. So what we try to do is more about encouraging people working in different constellations of networking and collaboration, where you can pull different kinds of skills and there's a learning happening along and so forth. But that's more important for us to build this robust collaboration formats for people where different skills are meeting. So journalists work with an artist, coach, investigator, all these kind of things and so forth, and somebody obsessed with something like a plane spotter and so forth. It all has some value, and you have to be very strategic on how you pull these values together and create an output of different kinds. But that allows you also to move very quickly and be kind of not only robust, super fastly changing world.
That's interesting. I think one of the things we've been reflecting on quite a bit, that this technology and this particular time is calling for much greater collaboration, not just between think tanks, but between think tanks and other organizations who have other skills and competencies. The think tanks, as you say, Marek, we're probably not gonna gain overnight, and certainly not going to gain in a sustainable way.
No, but also the idea that everybody should learn coding and do coding is absurd. I totally disagree with that. No, we don't need that. I mean, if it is necessary, you will do that, but most of us won't. We have other things to do, and we can work with people who can translate things into something that we can use. But I think more important in terms of education technology is understanding how it works, what's behind it. What kind of politics, ideology sits behind it is more important than learning code.
Okay, that's great advice. Sebastian?
How do you get the tech skills into the think tank if you don't have them? Well, there's so many different ways. So one thing you can do is you do cooperations. So you cooperate on different projects with people who have the skills, and they will bring this into your organization. We do this all the time. Another thing is you probably have already a lot of people who have interesting skills in your team, in your organization, and they can teach others. I mean, so what we do is we have a format once a week in our organization, which is called skill sharing. It's organized by someone who's the person is building a curriculum for the whole year, and each week one person is teaching the others on a specific issue. So one day we had a project on how to, machine translate your papers and incorporate this into your writing process. Another day you do, I don't know, how to do remote workshops in these days. So people should teach each other. But I also agree with Marek. I mean, in the end, we don't all need to become programmers. We really need to understand what technology we can use and where it makes sense and where it doesn't.
Thank you. And we're about to get to the end of our session, and it's been quite interesting. And I'm happy we've sort of finishing with this discussion around collaboration and sort of sharing what we know with others and using others' expertise in our work. Does the panel have any other reflections, any questions to your fellow panelists you'd like to add?
I might mention another example I was thinking about, because I see some people is asking for more like particular examples or practical examples they can use. And it's interesting that many of you, Jonathan, mentioned at the beginning the issue of the communities, and now we were talking about using WhatsApp, or these communities moving from MailChimp to WhatsApp or from newsletters to WhatsApp. And I think it's interesting that you can use these communities to learn and to collaborate with others, but you can also think of these communities as the space where you collaborate with your audience, not only with the experts that you look up to, but also with your audience. We are now working on a platform with the government of the city of Buenos Aires on climate change, and we have been asked to find a way for people to participate there. And it's hard because people don't want to participate a lot with the government, and also they were asking for the people to have some commitments to reduce their carbon emissions, and we thought that it was going to be hard for people to commit with the government in a platform. So what we are doing is that we are using this platform to open the space to a lot of NGOs that are working with these climate issues. And then we are sending users that are interested in taking one of these commitments to talk to one of these organizations in a chat group in WhatsApp. So we are doing very small groups so that they can work well in a WhatsApp group, and they are going to be connected to these organizations. And then these organizations are going to talk among them to define what are the different goals that they are going to propose to these users. So I think using these small communities to collaborate with others and to open your knowledge, share knowledge, and also receive knowledge and have this mindset of listening as well as talking with others, it's something that can help relate to our audiences and can be able to communicate in this very fragmented world that Jonathan was talking about before.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonia. Jonathan, Marek, Sebastian, any last words? No.
One last word.
Yeah.
So I've been working in technology policy for quite a while now, and I always thought like that technology is the driver of social change in our world. But within the last weeks, I really understood what is changing, what can change societies really quickly. So I want to recommend you one last book if you have some time, and it's called Pale Rider by Laura Spinney. And it's another book about the Spanish flu, but with a focus on how it changed societies and technology. So great read. And it's all the way back in history. So it doesn't worry you a lot if you read it.
Can you put it on the chat, Sebastian, for us to? Actually, I'm loving the way that people is commenting on the chat, and that
I've just done
Enrique is sending all the. I know how you think so quickly, and it's not a bot; it's Kike just writing there.
Some people might say that I sometimes behave like a bot. Okay, well, that was very interesting. Thank you very much. It's giving us a lot of things to think about. I myself go away thinking about this issue of collaboration, how to foster greater collaboration between different types of organizations and people with different skills, I go thinking that the infrastructure that we're going to need, to effectively incorporate technology into the way think tanks work, and for think tanks and other policy research institutions to adapt to technology around them and within the organizations, is not going to be something to be left to the end, right? I think we're going to have to think about this right from the start, because it's going to have huge implications on cost, on skill, in the way the organizations are led, the time frames they work with, etc., etc. And there is a field out there of information and knowledge about technology, whether it's sort of theoretical discussions around ethics and values, etc., or whether it's much more practical about what works for each organization and for each action or strategy or tactic we have in mind. We're going to have to collaborate more in learning from each other. So hopefully, as we all experiment with technology over the next few months or years, we will also be sharing what we learn about technology with each other, so that those who have fewer resources might benefit from that, but also we might get more feedback and we might learn together more effectively. So thank you very much, Marek, Jonathan, Sebastian, and Sonia for this trial, this panel, which was excellent. I'm very pleased. Thank you for those who've joined us and stayed online.